Okay. By show of hands, I'm sure we had a unanimous agreement that we all believe in God. We wouldn't really be here if we didn't believe in God. But how many of you really believe in God and have faith in God? How many of you act on that faith? I'm wearing a tie that has American flags on it. We had our Independence Day. We have faith in our rights. We know they exist. Therefore, we act differently as Americans. I grew up in Russia. It's not healthy to speak out against the government in Russia. You don't do that. You don't have faith in those rights. Yeah, they exist in the Russian Constitution, but you don't have faith in them, so you don't act on them. As Americans, we act on our rights that we know we have. As Christians, do we act on the faith that we do have in God? Serious belief is faith. Not just an intellectual idea. Yeah, I acknowledge that there's a God somewhere. There's something up in the sky that rules and kind of watches down and created the earth, maybe, kind of, sort of. No, that's not faith. That's some mealy-mouth acknowledgement that, yes, there's a God. Do you have faith in God? Do you allow Him to do what He said He's going to do? If you do have faith in God, if I have faith in God, why so often do we stumble? Why do we trade the trivial things of this world for the awesome power that God has? We let the world take over and rule our lives. The 11th chapter of the book of Hebrews, of course, is known for being about faith. I'm going to start reading in verse 3. This is what acting on your faith will do. Not just acknowledging, but actually acting on this faith. By faith we understand that the universe was formed at God's command, so that what is seen is not made out of what is visible. By faith Abel offered God a better sacrifice than Cain did. By faith he was commended as a righteous man when God spoke well of his offerings. And by faith he still speaks, even though he is dead. By faith Enoch was taken from this life so that he did not experience death. He could not be found because God had taken him away. For before he was taken, he was commended as one who pleased God. And without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to Him must believe that He exists, and He rewards those who earnestly seek Him. By faith, Noah, when warned about things not yet seen, in holy fear built an ark to save his family. By faith he condemned the world and became the heir of the righteousness that comes by faith. By faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. By faith he made his home in the promised land, like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. For he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith Abraham, even though he was past age, and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father, because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. And so from this one man, and as he is good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and countless as the sand on the seashore. All these people were still living by faith when they died. They did not receive the things promised. They only saw them and welcomed them from a distance. And they admitted that they were aliens and strangers on this earth. People who say such things show that they are looking for a country of their own. If they had been thinking of the country they had left, they would have had an opportunity to return. Instead, they were longing for a better country, a heavenly one. Therefore God is not ashamed to be called their God, for He has prepared a city for them. By faith, Abraham, when God tested him, offered Isaac as a sacrifice. He who had received the promises was about to sacrifice his one and only son, even though God had said to him, "It is through Isaac that your offspring will be reckoned." Abraham reasoned that God could raise the dead, and figuratively speaking, he did receive Isaac back from the death. By faith, Isaac blessed Jacob and Esau in regard to their future. By faith, Jacob, when he was dying, blessed each of Joseph's sons and worshipped as he leaned on the top of his staff. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave them instructions about his bones. By faith, Moses' parents hid him for 3 months after he was born because they saw that he was no ordinary child, and they were not afraid of the king's edict. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt, because he was looking ahead to his reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the king's anger. He persevered because he saw him who is invisible. By faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, so that the destroyer of the firstborn would not touch the firstborn of Israel. By faith the people passed through the Red Sea on dry land, but when the Egyptians tried to do so, they were drowned. By faith the walls of Jericho fell after the people had marched around them for 7 days. By faith the prostitute Rahab, because she had welcomed the spies, was not killed with those who were disobedient. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to talk about Gideon and Barak, Samson and Jephthah, David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of the lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned into strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so that they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and flogging, while still others were chained and put into prison. They were stoned, they were sawed in two, they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in the deserts and mountains, and in caves and in holes in the ground. These all were commended for their faith. What an example we have. All those heroes of faith that came before us, we call them heroes. I wonder sometimes if they considered themselves heroes, though. And it says they were hiding in caves and mistreated by their peers, by their governments. Wouldn't make me feel much like a hero. Here's a song that I'm going to read as a poem. Our Lord will return to this earth some sweet day. Our troubles will then all be o'er. The Master so gently will lead us away beyond that blessed heavenly shore. Living by faith in Jesus above, trusting, confiding in His great love. From all harm safe in His sheltering arm. I'm living by faith and I see no alarm. What enabled all the people that we just read about, and even the writer of Hebrews said, there are more people than I can even write about. That was 2,000 years ago. There are plenty of people in the past 2,000 years who have done great things because of their faith. They were enabled to do these things because they didn't just acknowledge that there was a higher power, but they believed in God and they allowed themselves to be propelled forward by God. The body will die, but there's a spirit. Man is eternal in that one way. Can't be destroyed, can't be killed, but there's a choice. You have a home in heaven or a home in hell. Next slide, please. Man goes to his eternal home. Remember God before the silver cord is severed or before the golden bowl is crushed. Before life is over, remember God. There's an eternal home. There are two of them. We have a choice. There's another song. I'm a song leader. I can put songs into my sermons. Someday the silver cord will break, and I no more as now shall sing. But oh, the joy when I shall wake within the palace of my King. Someday my earthly house will fall. I cannot tell how soon 'twill be. But I know this, my all in all, has now a place in heaven for me. Someday when fades the golden sun beneath the rosy tinted west, My blessed Lord will say, well done, and I shall enter into rest. Someday till then I'll watch and wait, my lamp all trimmed and burning bright, that when my Savior opes the gate, my soul to him may take its flight. And I shall see him face to face, and sing the story, saved by grace. All these people who had faith in Hebrews, since Hebrews, before Hebrews was written, they all had a reason for having this faith. They didn't do these things for their health. Being persecuted and stoned and sawed in two, as we're told, didn't really feel good, I'm sure. And they, just like us, they liked earthly comforts. They did not enjoy all these things. But there's a goal to our faith. Next slide, please. Next. Their goal in having this faith was to reach heaven. They knew by this faith that they had that God would always be there for them. In their darkest hour. I mean, isn't that where God can really shine, is in the darkness? If you have a flashlight and you're shining it in here right now, it won't do a lot. But if it was all dark and God is the only light shining, He will brighten up the whole room. But you have to turn the flashlight on. You have to call God to you. You have to allow Him. You have to have the faith in Him. Otherwise, it won't work. It says, the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. Until I got that one from my dad. Availeth. God listens to those who do have faith in Him. If I don't believe in God, and yet I still claim to call on God, it won't work. It just won't. It's kind of like plugging something 110 into a 220 outlet. It won't work. In Russia, the power is different. I grew up with blowing things up like that. If we call on Him believing, He will come. If you have faith in your rights as an American, when you say something against the government at any level, state, city, county, federal, you're not worried. I mean, you could say anything you wanted against the president and nothing could happen. You have an assurance. You have peace. Next slide, please. The next slide will actually be from Isaiah. Verse, the fruit of righteousness will be peace. And the effect of righteousness will be quietness and confidence forever. Confidence in knowing that God is there. Confidence in knowing that we can act and God will always be our safety net under us. So, walking the high wire of life, God is always there. We can't be hurt no matter what we try to do, as long as God is there supporting us. But if I try to walk this high wire and don't acknowledge that there's a net, don't believe that the net is there, and don't believe that the net is stable, I'm going to be just as nervous and unwilling to walk that wire as if there was no net at all. I have to believe it. The scripture reading was Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is being kind of, sort of, maybe, I guess, possibly in a way, depending that faith is what we hope for. Or faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. That's why I asked, do you believe in God? If you do, are you living it? Are you acting as if God is under you, if God is your net as you're walking this wire? Faith in God equals righteousness. Believing that He can take care of you in any way. physically cleansing you from sin in every single way. Faith in God equals righteousness. Isaiah says that righteousness equals confidence. If you're confident, you're not scared of anything. Nathan likes to play with fireworks. I'm scared of his fireworks. I kind of back away. But he said, oh no, he kind of plays with them, and then he's got a lighter, and the flame goes like this high. I don't do things like that. I'm not confident with fire. He's done it enough, he's confident with it. Are you confident with God? Have you exercised your faith in God enough that you're confident in it and you're not afraid? If you are confident, you'll live like there's no tomorrow. But as Christians, we're to live like there's no tomorrow for God. Next slides, please. Next. And next. And next. And next. Live like God. You live for God like there's no tomorrow. And one more. Okay. Israel is being attacked by the Philistines on all sides. They're really losing the war. Things are not going well for Israel. Young Prince Jonathan comes along, and he doesn't tell his daddy where he's going. He just gets his armor bearer, probably a close friend, and says, we're going to go take on the whole Philistine army. 2 people. Philistines were known as ferocious warriors. They were beating the whole army of Israel, and the prince thinks, you and I can take them on. Why? Because Jonathan said, nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by the many or by the few. Jonathan had trust in God. He had faith in God. He knew that nothing could happen to him. End of the story is, Jonathan and his armor bearer go fight the Philistines. They kill 200 of them. Faith in God that enables you to work. Some ways that faith has enabled people in the past. Next slide, please. Without faith, it is impossible to please God. Pleasing God is a thing that we do. Without faith, it won't work. If I can't imagine how someone could try to please God without faith. It doesn't make any sense to me. And again, it's more than just acknowledging His existence. It's putting your full trust in Him. Next slide, please. Gaining righteousness. Being a good person, a person acceptable to God, comes only by faith. And remember that righteousness equals peace and confidence. And we're not talking about the confidence like Jonathan had of going and defeating the whole Philistine army, but we're talking about confidence of salvation. The goal of our salvation, the goal of our faith is our salvation. Next slide. Focusing in on our new home. Only doable by faith. Only by faith can we see beyond this world. Can we see beyond the earthly things, and can we focus on the heavenly home? It says that he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. Even though he was living here, he said, no, my citizenship is not here. My citizenship is there, in the promised country. I've been promised a country too. A mansion. So have each of you. But are you accepting these things by faith? Are you going for them? Next slide. Now this one's kind of a chilling thought. It says, because of their faith, God was not ashamed to be called their God. So conversely, if a person doesn't have that faith, God would be ashamed to be called their God. So when you have the opportunity to live by faith, and you just let it pass, you let it drop, you go on by, and then you come and you say, "Oh God, thank you for all the things you've given me." God is up there in heaven saying, "I'm ashamed that you are calling me your God. Here you are, you say that you put all your trust in me for earthly things, for heavenly things, for eternal things, and yet you don't live like it." If we don't live the faith that God has given us, He's ashamed to be called our God. Next slide, please. They were not afraid of the king's edict. The king was a pretty powerful person back then. Whatever the Pharaoh said, that went. That was law. Moses' parents had faith. They said, "We don't care. Everything that God does for us is for our own good. We know we're going to stick with what God said. Whatever the king says is immaterial." Next slide. Because he saw him who is invisible. Faith is being sure of what you hope for and certain of what you cannot see. Something you can't see is invisible. But by faith, you can see it. We're going to sing "It Is Well With My Soul." "Till my faith becomes sight" is one of the lines in that song. By faith, you can see God. It's not an imaginary hocus-pocus thing. It's a real thing that in its own way is tangible. By faith, you can see God. Next slide. By faith, the Israelites passed through the Red Sea, but when the Egyptians tried, they all got drowned. If you try to live the life of faith without having the accompanying true faith, what's going to happen? The Israelites crossed through the Red Sea just fine. The Egyptians, they tried to do the same thing, but it didn't work. If you try to live the life of faith without the true faith there, nothing will work. Next slide. The saints of old, through faith, conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised. That last thing is the key. They gained what was promised. If I don't believe in God, if I don't have this enduring faith, this enabling faith that I act upon and live by, how can I get the promises that He's given? If I don't even believe in the promises, if I don't believe in the promise giver, how can I get the promises? Next slide, please. So do you believe in God? Do you have that faith in God? Do you act on it? Have you accepted it ever? There's some people who I'm sure raise their hands. Yes, I believe in God. Yes, I have faith in God, but do you really? Have you ever accepted Him? Next slide. And if you did ever accept that, are you living like it? If you said, "Yes, God, I accept you into my life. I'm going to live for you. I'm going to live by your faith." Are you living like it? Or have you traded the trivial things that the world can offer for all the majesty and splendor of God? If you're the person who has never accepted it, or if you're the person that did accept it and now you're not really sure where it is, we'd love to help you. The elders of this church would love to pray with you. Any of the people here, and God Himself, are begging for you to return to a life of faith, to come to a life of faith, and to live for God like there's no tomorrow. And to live for God like there's no tomorrow. And to live for God like there's no tomorrow. And to live for